Well, we have a fun situation today because we have a team that's in Los Angeles that's gathered to watch, and we have New York gathered to watch, and we have a lot of people online.
Coast to
So,
coast.
yeah. And we will be monitoring all of the questions along the way. So you'll be able
Okay.
to see us in New York for some of the time. You know, questions can come in the chat. They can come in the Q&A. You can text them to us. If you have our information, we'll aim to get them all to you at the end. Does that work, Beth?
Sure.
Amazing. Yeah, Bruce. Just see.
So humid out.
I know. Like I gave up on my hair.
Yeah, just, hair, forget hair. Just you know, in a movement.
Wow. It's super hot. For those of you who are not in New York today, it's humid, hot, and it's a bad hair day.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh well, not even trying.
Not even trying, yeah.
We have one more minute. Let me see how we're doing online. Oh, yeah, tough. All right. Well, I think most everyone is a council member. Those of you who are new to us, we are a 30-year-old not-for-profit trade association. You're clearly getting our emails, or you wouldn't be on the Zoom. And this presentation in particular is super exciting because we only get to dive into all the Circana data, work with the team with all of our members twice a year. So this is a long-awaited presentation by Beth Goldstein. We have a lot of other things coming up, though. For anyone who is in Los Angeles, next week we're going to be doing an event on the 22nd in Elise Walker. We have another event that we're going to be announcing shortly out there and meeting individually with as many of our members as possible. So let us know. Cindy's out there now hosting a team at the Mart, and I will be out there next week. Beyond that, we have a women's networking event that'll be in our offices here on the 29th with an author. We're going to do a networking event during August Market, and we are our Design Excellence Awards are open. So it's time to enter your product. Hey, it's getting really loud in here, and we are on. We are live.
We are live.
So, okay.
The bells.
It's noon, and the church outside has told us that it is time to get started. It's definitely one of the benefits of where our office is. We get to look out. You can't see it, but we get to look out at a beautiful church all day. So welcome, everyone. Beth is an industry advisor. She's been part of the council for a very long time with Circana. She is a fount of amazing information and data, and we are super excited to have you with us today. We're going to save our questions for the end. You can put them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A. You can text them to us, and we will get all our questions to Beth after her presentation. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Hi to everyone coast to coast. That's very exciting. And to everybody online. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to talk about just what's happening in retail so far this year. It's been quite interesting, and accessories as well, but I'm going to, keep it relatively high level. Obviously, the accessories industry is very broad, lots of different categories, sub-industries, and business challenges, but I'm going to give you a lot of high-level context on what's happening in retail so that you can, kind of think of your own businesses, in relation to that. This is just a little bit about me. That QR code, by the way, will take you right to my LinkedIn profile, and I'll pop it up again at the end. But I am the industry advisor for footwear and accessories at Circana. I've been at Circana for over 20 years. Prior to that, I went through Lord and Taylor's executive training program. And I'm a member of the board of Accessories Council, so that's of course very rewarding. So yes, so I would love to connect if we are not connected already. Just a little bit about Circana. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I guess I'll still say this. It's been a couple of years, but we were previously NPD, also previously IRI. So, some of you, that 20-year history that I have was mostly with NPD, where we tracked, more of the general merchandise categories. And then in 2022, we merged with IRI, and we rebranded as Circana. So now we have tracking across, a number of additional industries, and mainly food, beverage, and consumer packaged goods, which obviously is a big part of consumers' wallets these days. And I'll show you how that all relates in a couple of minutes. So here's what we're going to do today. As I always do, I'm going to start big picture. When we look at the overall retail picture, we do see retail sales, they're holding up despite a lot of the macro challenges that are going on. And that's because consumers are really prioritizing their spend. So some industries are continuing to see growth, and some industries are more challenged. We'll talk about what the retail landscape looks like today with some more of those consumer drivers, like wanting convenience and wanting overall value. So that doesn't necessarily mean lowest price, but it means different things to different consumers. Then we'll talk a little bit about some consumer groups like female consumers, Hispanic consumers, younger consumers, and see what's happening right now with their spend across retail. And then we'll wrap it up. Of course, I'll be talking a little bit about what's happening with tariffs throughout. Very uncertain environment. I know you've all been grappling with that. But obviously we'll close with some ways to continue to find opportunity in uncertain landscape. So let's get into the big picture. I know there's a lot here, and I don't expect you to see every number and word here, but this is the picture of that 3.3 trillion that we're tracking in US retail spend at Circana. So you see that it is up. This is the 12 months ending March, so through the first quarter of the year. So it's up 2%. Most of that is still due to price growth, not yet price growth due to tariffs, but more price growth due just, the price growth that we've been seeing now for, a number of years, just general inflation that has been sticky. On the top, interestingly, we see home categories. Now, home categories were super strong during the pandemic, then took a dip, and then now have improved again. And some of that is just that like replenishment cycle coming back up. So some of the things that were bought during that pandemic time period are up for replenishment. Some of it is actually consumers looking to save money by doing more DIY projects. So that's a lot of why we see home improvement up rather than hiring professionals. We also do see beauty, both in the mass side and the prestige, continuing to do very well. And I've talked about this before, how strong beauty is and the lessons that can be learned there, just in terms of innovation and the importance of wellness and self-care and the social media as drivers. So beauty continues to be an area where consumers of all ages are prioritizing, even as they're pulling back on spend on other areas. The big number there, the retail food and beverage, that's sort of a little bit more than halfway down, over $1 trillion and up 3% there. So that is still due to inflationary pricing, which has come down. So that's a positive, but it's still there. And then you see kind of in the bottom third, more of the discretionary categories. Now, accessories, after a number of years of declines is up 1% versus last year. So that is a positive turnaround. We'll look at what's driving that in a couple of minutes. Footwear is down 2%, and you can see apparel right below footwear that's down 2%. So definitely the more, the categories that consumers are deeming more necessities are stronger, whereas some of the more discretionary are underperforming a bit. And this is just another view, very quick. This is kind of the share of wallet. So, of the consumer's wallet, if they had $100 to spend, 52 of it's going to food, and that's a little higher than last year. Then the next biggest is home, which continues to gain a little bit share. These are not huge share gains, but these are very, very large groupings of categories, so we wouldn't expect to see major share gains. So health and beauty, home, auto has been a little flat, and that's really just come out of the fashion wallet. So I don't think that'll be surprising, but we continue to see that other categories are gaining at fashion's expense. So it's a challenging time for fashion. But it's been a busy time, right? A lot of activity out there, across the footwear and accessories landscape, even in the apparel space, in the beauty space, a lot of deals happening, and that's typical of, challenging times. So, I mean, all of this comes on the heels of the acquisition of Capri by Tapestry last year that ended up, not happening. That wasn't to be. But we've got some interesting ones on the table for this year, and we'll see how the regulatory action goes there. But Steve Madden acquiring Kurt Geiger, which has been one of the strongest performing handbag brands of the last couple of years. Activity going on in the luxury space. So after the Tapestry acquisition didn't happen, Prada is acquiring Versace. Saks Fifth Avenue has got a number of interesting things happening, and that's in addition to acquiring Neiman Marcus last year. So partnering with Amazon, having a storefront with authentic brands, the goal, that creating a luxury group that's going to turn certain of their brand equities into lifestyle brands like Barney's New York or Judith Lieber, Vince. And then potentially, I don't know, this is more rumored than definite, but potentially partnerships with Centric to bring the Saks Fifth Avenue name to Costco. So there's been talk about that, but I don't know that it's definite. And then I mentioned the Amazon storefront, and we also saw Nike. I mean, that's a little peripheral to our categories here, but it comes on the heels of Coors, Coach, reinvigorating their relationships with Amazon and creating shops there. So it's really indicating a shift in how brands are perceiving Amazon as integral to growth. And so, all of these moves kind of just change the landscape, right? And as I said, it's typical of challenging times as companies look for growth, and there are moves to be made. We'll talk about more towards the end. We'll talk a little bit more about potential implications of tariffs on the industries. But we've been doing some survey work. This is overall just asking consumers if they plan to change their habits. And it seems like consumers are more educated about tariffs than back in 2018 because there's just so much out there, particularly in social media, about it. The most popular response when we asked if consumers were going to change their spending was over a third of respondents said that they're going to cut back on their spending. And then after that, about one quarter said they delay, whether that would be to look for lower priced options or just wait and see what happens. And about 16% said they would buy things sooner to avoid price increases. And we saw that in a couple of industries. So in tech, in juvenile, where there has been some pull forward. I'll actually show you that in a minute. About a quarter said they wouldn't change their spending plans. But of those that said they would, the top categories are restaurant visits, clothing, footwear, and accessories is kind of one entity, and then entertainment away from home. So we're watching the retail sales here. I mean, we've seen that consumers have pulled back on some of their fashion purchases even before price increases start to take effect. We haven't necessarily seen it in the restaurant visit data yet, but we're starting to see a little bit shift in the types of restaurants that consumers are visiting. So we're definitely keeping our eyes on that. In terms of price activity, what that's looked like so far this year, we really haven't seen too much of a shift through May. So this is average price at retail, not MSRP. So even if price increases have been imposed, we wouldn't necessarily see them come through in the average prices yet. So the biggest changes we've seen in average price, I just in tech and juvenile. So those are both industries where there has been some pull forward of purchasing on higher ticket items. And then also in toys, which is very reliant on China. So I had to make some very quick moves on pricing. And you can see accessories and footwear, there really hasn't been much change versus where they were in 2024. So footwear still up about 2 points, 2%, and then accessories still down about 4%. Okay, so I will go into the, kind of the state of accessories. That's going to be very quick, and then we're going to move through just some more of the topics. So this is the accessories picture. This mirrors, later in the year, we'll be putting out our report in Accessories Magazine, and these are the categories we usually report on. So you'll get a little bit more detail with that, but just, overall across these footwear and accessories categories, this represents about 119 billion in total sales. Dollars across these industries are down 1 and units are +1. It would actually, if we are nitpicky, I've rounded, but it's actually really dollars down like 0.5 point and units up 0.5 point. So it's kind of around flat, and average prices are, flat to slightly. So all industries are down here with the exception of jewelry. So this is a big turnaround for jewelry. So that's a pretty high dollar percent change. It's coming off of a number of years of declines, but it kind of mirrors what you're hearing, and reading about out there and seeing in, some of the more public results that have come out. This is actually going to be more on, of course, we track whatever consumers are purchasing, but we tend to record more purchases, on the fashion side of jewelry rather than the fine jewelry. So it is trickling down. So I think that's an interesting shift in what consumers are, purchasing, potentially looking at them as stronger investments, more self-expression. So consumers are definitely finding the value in jewelry right now, where the other categories remain challenged. Okay, so let's move in to what's happening at retail. So, across industries, we have definitely seen some shifts. And this is a theme that we are also seeing in when we look specifically in accessories, where we've got more granular data, like in bags, in footwear, that the growth areas are e-commerce, and pure play e-commerce is largely Amazon, a couple of smaller players in there as well. And then club. And now, this is inclusive of food and other categories as well. But that's not the only areas where those are growing. So when we separate those general merchandise where the fashion categories would fall, growth is coming from pure play, like you saw, from the home improvement category. So that ties into the first slide, home improvement retailers, and also club retailers. So it's pretty consistent across types. And so I think this does indicate some larger trends that, consumers really looking for value and really looking to save. And just looking at club channel, almost 2/3 of those we surveyed said that they have a warehouse club membership, and about 1/4 of them have started those in the last year. So, and they're doing that looking for lower prices, cost saving on groceries, bulk. So, I think it's probably more grocery necessity related. But when you have people going into the store, then you have the ability to for them to look for that one-stop shopping, which we have seen. The convenience factor is certainly a contributor to, why Amazon has done so well as well. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that. So, even Costco, when I talk about handbags and small leather goods, Costco is the number 2 growth retailer. Amazon's number 1, Costco's number 2, and Costco is an in-store proposition, whereas Amazon is an online. So that's really interesting to see that you have both up there at the top, but Costco does have that convenience factor. People are going, there to buy other things. So, the warehouse for handbags and small leather goods, the warehouse channel sales have more than doubled during the past year. And the Costco success has come from more than doubling its buyers and increasing its spend per buyer by 15%. And Costco is often talked about for its higher income consumer. And we do see here that the 100K plus consumer accounts for about 2/3 of its bags and small personal accessory sales. And while all income segments grew their spend in Costco this past year, it's that 100K plus group accounted for 70% of that growth. And as you can see by the images I chose to show here, I think that social media has, really helped to drive this. And when we look at Amazon, and this is on, broader, more the total accessory sales. So Amazon continues to, their sales continue to tick up, now about 1/4 of total accessories sales. Amazon is well over half of all online sales in accessories, and that continues to grow. And almost 90% of Amazon sales are third party. So, that's very significant. So we are seeing some of the major fashion brands, like I mentioned earlier, partnering with Amazon on a first party basis again. So we may start to see this tick down, but it will likely remain the majority. So interested to see our results. We actually did get some preliminary results for last week, which was Prime Days, up double digits in accessories and footwear. However, the timing shifted. So Prime Day was the week that we're in last year. So we can't really make any judgments yet. Obviously, the initial reports of Prime Day were positive. Of course, it was a 4-day event, but we can't really make any judgments until we see the full picture, since we did have that calendar shift. But e-commerce is still extremely important. So, want to just drive that point home that it's not really one or the other, right? Both are super important, but across retail, e-commerce account about 1/4 of the dollar sales, but almost 60% of the dollar growth. So there are industries that are still seeing e-commerce perform in store. In footwear and accessories, which you see highlighted here because I know there's a lot on this chart. In footwear and accessories, it's actually been pretty consistent. So they're, towards the middle range in terms of online penetration, but that's actually been pretty stable for the past couple of years. So what that means is that the in-store sales and the online sales are performing very similarly. So it's not one versus the other. And the more that those can work together, the better. So, you can see that there is a wide range. Some of the industries that are the highest penetration of online sales are continuing to grow. And, you kind of see on the other sale, there's a couple of industries, particularly in the food space, not certainly that are much lower in penetration, but are growing. So, really important to keep this in mind. And social media has a big impact on online sales. Social media can absolutely drive in-store sales as well, but the online piece is going to be the biggest beneficiary. Over 40% of consumers told us that they, mainly use social media to discover new fashion brands or trends. And, bags in particularly, the impact is significant. And, these are just some examples that I pulled out from some survey questions that we have specific to the bags category. But over 80% of females aged 18 to 34 say they have used social media to either learn or discover bags, brands, or retailers. Almost 2/3 of females aged 18 to 34 have made a bags purchase after seeing it on social media. And what's interesting is how they're doing that. So about half say that they did it via a direct link. So the highest was, just online in general, but the direct link is growing in importance as the platforms really focus on their direct selling capabilities. So for example, TikTok Shop. So, very, very impactful. And also social media drives viral trends, as we know. Viral trends are everywhere across industries and categories, but they do seem particularly prevalent in accessories. And to me, it's really changed the dynamics of the category because it's really broadened consumers' views on what's acceptable or cool to carry. And many of the items that go viral and become must-haves are not exactly the types of products that, those of us in the industry really are selling, traditionally. So, here's just some examples from last holiday: the Walmart Birkin craze, and the Trader Joe's mini tote that's now in its second year. It kind of reemerged as when they launched some spring pastel colors. And the last one isn't an actual bag, but Labubus have certainly taken over TikTok, and they're stealing mind share, wallet share, as people snatch up the real ones, the fake ones, it doesn't matter, to accessorize their bags or their outfits. And it's taking the bag charm trend to another, whole level. And obviously the novelty and personalization and customization has been important, as it is a way, to drive self-expression for, a more accessible price point. Dupes is another part of the story. I think I presented some of this data last year, but we re-asked a question again about dupes purchasing, and we saw that the percentage of consumers that said they had purchased a dupe increased 8 points. Some of that is those that said they would do it again. Most of that is those that said they would do it again. Some of it is said they wouldn't. But we also see a quarter that said they have purchased one, that they have not purchased one, but would consider it. That's down from last year because more people actually had bought one. And in terms of categories, number one of those dupes that have been purchased come from apparel, and that's up versus last year. Accessories and handbags was actually stable versus last year, with just over 40% saying they purchased them. Footwear is down a little bit at 35%, and I think maybe it's down because the athletic business is so strong with a couple of big brands. And, they also actually, athletic footwear does a good job of their own segmentation. So a lot of the popular items, they are available in different tiers of in different versions and different tiers of distribution. So they kind of are owning their dupes a little bit. This may change, but I think that's a reason why we saw a little bit less reporting of footwear dupes. And in terms of where consumers purchase dupes, over half of consumers said that they purchased their dupes from Amazon. But the percentage of those saying that they purchased from both Walmart and Shein increased because dupes are becoming more widely available. And there are lots of ways to get the look for less, right? Knockoffs are nothing new, but these dupes are not fakes. They're not being passed off as the real thing. And so what's really changed is that it's become much more accessible, or even acceptable, or even smart to spend less to get a similar aesthetic and what is often perceived to be of similar quality, whether that's true or not, to the original. Steve Madden's recent interview on on the podcast that went viral was really interesting because he was very unapologetic about creating items that are heavily influenced by iconic designer styles. And you can kind of see that across categories here. In many cases, there's a huge gap between the price of the original and the price of the dupe. So the dupes in that case are not likely to cannibalize sales of the original, but that's been interesting to watch because some of the most heavily duped brands are still performing very well, and other dupe brands have started to slow. And I think that relates to the price gap, the equity, or the heat of the brand being duped, and just the prevalence and quality of the alternatives. And there often is something in the middle, right? Particularly like on the left, the Bottega example is a super obvious example. But there's this factory direct element that has kind of emerged in the last few months, with videos popping up on social media from factories in Asia that are claiming to be making the designer goods, and providing contact info to be purchased directly tariff free. So that's been a post-tariff phenomenon. And we are seeing a luxury slowdown. Are dupes to blame? Maybe slightly. I don't think that's the whole story. There's a number of factors at play here. So across fashion categories, we are seeing the luxury business underperform the non-luxury business. And for the most part, what I mean by luxury is sort of a designer brand. And so we're seeing that across the board, most starkly in accessories, followed by footwear. A lot of that is just that other items, consumers are not looking to stretch there. In footwear, luxury was highly driven by sneakers. The luxury sneaker business has really slowed down as it's been more of the athletic brands gaining ground over the last couple of years. Those have been the status items. And, in accessories, we've definitely seen it, particularly in the bag space where the designer business, was very strong coming out of the pandemic with all that savings and stimulus help. And you can see, though, that its performance now, even though it was up against some very strong comps, it's now struggling into its third year. When we look at price point for the designer segment in bags, we see that while all ranges are declining, if we looked in terms of sales, it's the higher end of the spectrum that's performing better and gaining share. So that's a result of a few factors, right? The aspirational consumers not being able to stretch for entry-level designer product, and not seeing the value in it right now. But the higher end consumer has not been impacted financially as much. And there's still a little bit of that quiet luxury trend hanging around. So just overall, the designer space is, faced with pressures from resale, maybe some of those factory direct tie-in dupes that I mentioned. Okay. I'll keep going. Feel free to stop me if there are any questions that have come in. But I'll keep going to talk about some of the consumer shifts that we're seeing. So we're going to talk about the younger consumer, females, Hispanic consumers, and then what are some of those lifestyle drivers that are happening right now. So let's start with the younger consumer. Younger consumers, and yep.
There were a couple questions. I don't know if you can see them on the screen.
Oh, I can okay. I do when I open it. So, okay, so questions about jewelry, which are always the most popular questions for us. So we track all of jewelry, and we do that by collecting consumers' receipts to our panel that we scrape the receipts, and that's where we get the information. So it is a consumer-driven panel. The information that's reported is very accurate because it's the actual info that's on the receipt, but it is still a consumer panel, and it is harder to track that consumer that is buying, fine jewelry. So it is in there, but I would say that our data is more heavily weighted towards the fashion jewelry, which I think would include, the bridge jewelry category. So I think that kind of answers, there's two questions about jewelry and what it includes. So yes, technically it does, but I think I will be transparent and say that we are, our tracking on fashion jewelry is stronger than on fine jewelry. And then I do see a question about weight loss drugs eating into accessory sales, and mostly taken by women and are very expensive. So that's a great question. And that's an interesting perspective from the financial, right? So that is another area, and it's not necessarily when I showed you all the retail sales, we don't have the tracking on the sales and the money that's being spent on these drugs. But that's a great point because it's just another area that consumers are spending their money on. Similar to, services and, entertainment and things like that, that is outside the home, which is harder to track the spend on. In the apparel category, there's actually more of a direct correlation because it's more about people buying, needing to buy new things or, going down in size and things like that. So they're watching for an actual correlation. But I think that the financial component of it is important as well. Now, although you hear about them all the time, the actual number of the population, I think it's something like 6 to 8% that's taking them. So it's relatively small, but I think it is a good point and something to think about. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and we'll come back to some questions later. Okay. So younger Americans, now that they're not the only ones dealing with a lot of these, these challenges, but they're hitting them at a time when traditionally, they'd just be starting out with jobs and, finding places to live and potentially getting married and starting families. So it's a little bit challenging out there, just some of these factors here that you see here in terms of the job market and, increased debt. And the lack of, back a couple of years, we had more of the stimulus. The cost of living and housing continues to increase, so that's a big one. So they're delaying some of those milestones, and of course, mental health challenges as well. So there's a lot happening at a macro level for a younger consumer right now, and we can see them starting to. Their spend is starting to slide. So this is actually their spend per buyer on a rolling basis. And we can see that while it's remained steady for older, or not older, 25 plus consumers, that youngest group, it's really starting to dip. And it's dipping, really across most industries. When we look at 18 to 24-year-olds versus other age groups. So apparel, and footwear and accessories, you can see that age group. Now, what's interesting is in some categories, particularly like footwear, the spend for those consumers is declining. But actually, if you take a little bit of and looking, it's a spend buy because this is the buyer. But we do see that parents who are still buying, we're maybe at 18, you're kind of just out of this, but parents buying for teens and some of maybe the 18 to 20-ish is actually growing because they're prioritizing spend on their kids. But as we're getting a little bit older into that period, those age groups where consumers are spending on themselves, we're seeing them pull back. And we see it. I've got an example from handbags. It's actually not the 18 to 24 isn't the weakest area. It's actually more the 25 to 34. We see they're spending more on home, and so there's really like a life stage element to this. And so really when we look at that 18 to 34 as a grouping, that's the most challenged. So it's really important to understand what are the drivers, right? It's interesting because it's not price and promotion. Quality is number one and really stands out for younger consumers, as well as versatility, some features, and then, the trends and the style. And what I think is interesting here is, when we're looking at bags specifically, the overall value is really consistent across industries. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And, value means different things to different people, maybe about quality and brand for one consumer, but more about price for another. So it's really about understanding what drives that value for the target consumer. Um, So female, um, a little bit on this, not surprisingly, I mean, females represent, I think it's 51% of the population in the US, but they account for about 60% of the spend. So over index, maybe by not as much as you would think. Of course, that's going to over index in some of our categories, and you'll see that in a moment. But we've seen that while both males and females are starting to trend downward across general merchandise, females doing that at a little bit more of a sharper rate. So when we look at their importance to different industries, not surprisingly for the fashion categories, females are, over index in terms of importance and how much of the spend they contribute to. But those are also the areas where they are down and, continue to be down, especially when we're looking at more of a shorter time frame versus a longer time frame. With the exception of footwear, we do see the females are continuing to decline at a faster rate. So I don't think this is surprising, but I think it's very important to focus on because, if the spend by women goes down, there really is probably, we're going to have a harder time recovering. And a lot of brands have really been targeting women and have been successful. So Stanley, of course, the overall Stanley the portable beverage wear category is still pretty strong, but we're seeing some shift in brands, of course, as is natural when we see huge trends like that. But Stanley has been very successful in really targeting women, and a brand that was historically not for women, really shifting and targeting and creating products that women are really responding to. Lego's sales have been driven by women and the lines that they have created for adults and women specifically, in the kind of tech jewelry space as well. And then, of course, categories that are more based around women's health have been much more prominent. It's much more acceptable to talk about these issues. A stat from our, books analysts, that books about menopause have really been growing as just more and more information is out there about understanding what women are going through. So, so seeing a slowdown, but still very, very important to focus on this consumer and really speak their language. Hispanic, just very quickly, this is something that our chief retail analyst, Don Unser, and Marshall Cohen came into the year saying that Hispanic spending was going to be challenged based on what's happening in the, with the administration in the US. So when we look at Hispanics, make up 17% of general merchandise dollars. It's 20% for accessories. So that's, we're over indexing there in the importance of Hispanics, and some, this is going to vary by brand. Some brands have more of a Hispanic base than others, but we're starting to see that Hispanic consumers are pulling back on spend more so than non-Hispanics. And, there's a lot of more anecdotal evidence for this as well when you read articles about retailers and what they're saying, particularly in regions where there are higher Hispanic populations. And this is a hard thing to also watch for. So we're picking it up, but I don't think any research company, a challenge for any research company is to really understand the buying patterns of consumers that have maybe come here more recently, and the consumers that maybe are feeling a little bit more threatened. They're not the consumers that are necessarily, submitting receipts and answering surveys. So we're also looking at retail data in a lot of those regions and seeing similar trends. I will say, though, that in accessories here, we haven't seen this impact as much. So it's definitely something to watch and, see if we start to see that accessories follows the trend. So it's still kind of early stages. And then lastly, in terms of drivers, I know this is a very controversial topic, it seems. I'm not sure why, but it seems like it is. There is multiple data sources out there. This is the one we've been kind of using, Castle Systems, showing that office occupancy on an average weekly basis is still just above 50%. It is increasing ever so slightly, but it still is hovering around that 50% right now. Different research and articles being written, but a common theme is that kind of despite an uptick in office attendance policies, the actual attendance lags. And then there was also some new data from the Labor Department this week, and it showed how the percentage of women who report spending some time working from home has stayed constant year over year, while the percent of men who report spending time working from home has declined. So that suggests that in this overall office discussion, more men are working in person. So that may ultimately have implications on women's career paths, but it also potentially ties back to how they are spending. So back to our conversation just a couple of minutes ago, whether that's on their wardrobes or food outside the home. So a lot of implications there, but we continue to watch. I still do believe that, we are in a more hybrid environment. In many different ways, and that is something that we need to keep in mind, as a retail industry. The other area I have talked about a lot over the years is travel, and of course I follow it closely as we're looking at sales of travel goods specifically, but it is important to other categories as well. And this is screen travelers that go through TSA in the US. So they might be leaving the US, but just it gives you an idea of the US consumer that's traveling. And, it exceeded in 2024 its 2019 baseline. So you're seeing a lot of mixed messages on that as well, where airline passenger counts and screen passengers seem to continue to be hitting records. And it is continuing to grow, but that growth is slowing. And you're starting to see reports from the airlines that bookings are slowing down and that, people are pulling back on spend on travel. But it does remain a very important aspect of consumer lifestyle. So we'll keep watching this. We certainly do see it slowing down, but as of now, it still has exceeded pre-pandemic levels. But another thing to look at, and this is a different angle, is tourists coming into the US. And that has not recovered. And now in 2025 has since actually begun to decline again. So it kind of reached, within a couple of percentage points of the pre-pandemic baseline, and now has dipped down again so far in the first half of this year. And, you read the headlines on why that might be, just, results of some of this, trade policy that's being implemented and nervousness on, for travel for certain populations. So definitely also something to keep in mind on, because this impacts retail in the US, especially, certain big cities and types of retailers that really depend on tourism for business as well. All right. So now let's talk a little bit just about some expectations for the rest of the year, which obviously we cannot do without talking about tariffs. Now, I am not as expert on all of this as Karen and her team have become, but we have been surveying consumers about their awareness, their planned behavior changes. And I showed you that high level insight at the beginning, which was a very general question, but we've asked it in a number of industries. I have it for handbags. So we asked, about 2/3 of consumers said that they plan to change their purchasing behavior. And that's mostly by cutting back on purchasing and looking for more sales and promotions. And I think while the magnitude and the percentages might differ by industries, we have seen that those two are really at the top, not surprisingly. There are some other areas, you know, um, trying to buy a little bit more from off price, resale, which is a little bit over indexed on a younger consumer. So a lot is still uncertain here. It still is changing by the day. We know, I suppose we kind of now know the story for China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia most recently. So I think that doesn't mean that things aren't going to change again, but for now we kind of know what we're dealing with a little bit more. But because of this, I expect that, the balance of the year will remain soft due to these pricing concerns and just overall concern on the part of the consumer. When we ask what kind of price increase would you accept, to kind of understand where consumers will draw the line. About 25% for footwear and more like 35% for handbags say no price increase is good. I'm gonna, change my purchasing behavior with any price increase. But then you've got about 30%, 25 to 30% that say they'll accept up to 10%, a little bit less up to 15 and down from there. So, I think the price increases that have been talked about, across the board are, really in that range. But it's gonna be tough, and brands are really gonna have to be cognizant in a tough environment about raising prices. But obviously, we don't expect that all of the cost increases are going to be absorbed in the chain. So here are just some high-level expectations for what will happen as a result of tariffs. They may not be all relevant to everyone. You all know your individual business is best, but I'm kind of coming at this from a broad market perspective. So I think that very soon, and potentially starting with, when we see our June data shortly, we'll start to see some of this, but, price increases of about 5 to 15%. And, this is in line with the max the consumer will be willing to absorb. And, this won't all flow through to average selling price, though, especially at first, based on, promotion activity and expected trading down activity in some categories. I know there has been and may still be some supply chain disruption driven by, the extreme ups and downs we've seen in terms of the tariff percentages, but I think the impact will be minor overall. It'll vary by category, but, a lot of our categories are more low purchase frequency and also more discretionary categories. So might impact a little bit more like in kids footwear and back to school, but I don't think the shelves are going to be empty. I think we kind of got past that. And, I think the disruption will be minor. In terms of pricing activity, 3 initial waves. So back to school to late summer, depending on the category here. And then fall holiday, and then absolutely spring 26, where after that we may be at a new level and maybe, be a little bit more stable for a while. Not to say that we won't see incremental increases there, but it won't be as steep. And then, how do I think consumers will respond? I think the number one behavior is still going to be prioritizing that purchasing. The consumer is going to continue to buy what they need when they need it. So, that may be cutting back and buying, fewer footwear, less accessories. But, and they are also likely to be looking for more deals when they do feel that they need something. So I think, I got a lot of questions on whether, I thought during Prime Day, was it going to be more focused on fall product or back to school product, back to school. And I think, or even holiday, right? Was holiday going to be pulled up to these July promotions? And I think that most consumers are not really focused on that right now, and they don't have the extra discretionary income to really focus on buying things that they're not going to need for months. So again, that overall focus on value, which is very important. So that's really the place to focus on. And you know, the environment is challenging. So, but despite that, there can still be ways to drive demand. And oftentimes the opportunities arise when the environment is tough. So, in terms of innovation, we really can't take our foot off the gas there. We are finally getting out of the post-COVID innovation rut. We can start to see when we look at our data that higher percentages of sales are coming from newer items where that was really slow for a while. So we can't stop that now, or we won't be well positioned to give consumers, newness when things do improve. So we have to continue to give consumers a reason to buy. That can be through product, it can be through innovative messaging, through new ways to reach consumers, distribution. Obviously, do the due diligence for your business, but don't count anything out. We're seeing some very interesting partnerships that we probably thought we would never see right now. And the consumer's shopping very differently, so they're warranted. Timing, the consumer follows their own calendar, and we need to be more on top of that. Some categories of accessories are less seasonal than others, so that's a benefit. So what are those smaller occasions or uses that we can focus on, right? Whether it's vacation, festivals, weddings, anything to drive that demand and that perceived need. Versatility, the ultimate value comes from versatility, more impactful in some categories and more relevant than some categories in others, but we continue to see the continued blurring of fashion and function. The connection, that's knowing where and how to speak to your consumers and how to evolve with them. Can you offer novelty? How can you offer novelty, personalization, relevance? Social media allows something like a subscribers only podcast to go viral, right? Which can be both a positive and a negative. So, managing that is key. And then lastly, disruption, right? The industry is disrupted right now. It just, showed you a lot of examples of that, but so is the consumer, and they may be looking to make a change based on how they shop, where they shop, what brands they're buying. So, that can represent opportunities as well. And I know we're all friends in the industry, but generally when we have an industry where we're not expecting the pie to grow, growth opportunities really come from taking share. So, this can be certainly opportunity. So there's always that expression that, never to waste a good crisis, right? All right, so thank you very much. Those are kind of my closing thoughts. I'll put this back up here. So thank you. I really appreciate you joining today. There's that code again if you'd like to connect, and you can also visit Circana.com to sign up for our newsletters if you are not receiving them already. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing, and if I can find my stop share, and then
Amazing.
see if there are any other questions.
Beth, we have a few questions in the chat. Do you want to take a peek, or I could read them?
Sure. Let me see. I think, okay, the only last one were some standout brands for Bridge Jewelry. We'll have to come back to you on that. I mean, jewelry, again, we track at a very, very high level. And that's just not where we have the detailed data. I can look into it and see if I can pull out a few nuggets. But in general, we're kind of more on a high level there.
Maybe that'll be in the fall issue of Basic.
Yeah, we'll dig a little bit deeper. Yeah, exactly. Read the fall issue.
Okay, read the fall issue, which will be out in the middle of September. Does anybody in the room have questions? Abby, come on up.
Okay, I have a couple of questions actually, based on some of the earlier slides. So in terms of Amazon Prime Day, fashion, et cetera, it being such a large portion of the pie, is that happening on properly on the app, or is that, offshoots including Amazon Fashion, Shopbop, all those other sorts of things? I don't know if you have answers to that necessarily, but I was just curious.
So you're asking if if the boost from Amazon Prime Day happens primarily on the Amazon app, or if it's a result of if it's coming from other areas?
So I'm just wondering if it's coming from like Amazon proper or like everything in their portfolio. So including Shop Off, the Amazon fashion arm, etc.
Yeah, I think it's coming from all. I mean, I think Amazon proper, is the biggest piece of it. And then when we get the results, we see the boost in fashion this week, like I said, but the calendar shift, we need to really see where it lays out. Amazon Prime has become more of an event for tech, for home products, a little bit for certain types of outdoor activities, particularly in the summer. That's what people are concerned with. There was more beauty on it this year than ever before, prestige beauty. So I'm ultimately not expecting that for fashion categories, it's going to be such a major driver. It's also I don't know what your experience was, but it's very hard to shop. Unless you're really just focused on those big deals that they're offering, which tend to be more home and tech related.
One of your partner companies, Civic Science, seems that they have a number of, they've been tracking it. I know they have a webinar actually at 1 o'clock today, but that's
Oh.
more targeted towards food and beverage from Prime Day.
Yeah.
So we'll watch their output and see if they have anything that is on our, that covers any of our categories.
Yeah.
If everybody isn't following Civic Science, you should be. They have amazing.
Definitely recommend.
Statistics. Yeah. Did you have more?
Oh, yeah, I do. Okay. So in terms of the social shopping driving in person, are we seeing disparities in price point between Instagram and TikTok? I know, historically we think of, TikTok as being, more of the impulse buy, lower price point, and Instagram, we see it's like being a little bit more luxury. I'm just curious if that's played out in the data, if you have access to that.
That's a great question. We don't have specific data from the platforms, but I will take that back and see if we have any insights on that, or can potentially glean some survey insights from that. So that's an interesting question. I mean, I agree with you on kind of your perceptions there, but I also do think you're starting to see more on TikTok, right? Brands kind of working directly. But I think that probably, is the case.
I have one other question. Nobody else is asking them. Okay, so I know you said there's a big lift with memberships, Costco, et cetera. And
Yep.
of course, Amazon's Amazon. Do we have any data on email marketing and as opposed to social, like paid social with ads? Because email marketing obviously is much cheaper for customer acquisition, and you can get, much more granular, much more profitable. I was just curious, if there's, email, like an email funnel that's driving things, or if it's just like in the moment purchase from the student post on TikTok shop.
Again, not an area where we have tracking data on, metrics there, but good question that potentially could look into for survey work. And we do have some media work that we are doing. So let me go back and see if we do have anything there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, my
Sure.
whole thing, there is this big D2C boom, and now everybody's doubling down on big box and wholesale to fuel their growth. And part of the D2C boom, the customer acquisition cost.
Sure.
And now the customer acquisition cost is crazy. But it's has the pendulum gone the other way at this point,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we definitely see that.
It's become a cheaper opportunity,
Right. Right. And
curious.
yeah, a way to reach. Right. Yeah, I mean, we certainly have seen that with a number of brands. It's not, the pendulum isn't swinging all the way back, but some that went a little bit more heavy on the DTC are kind of reinvigorating their wholesale relationships, and these kind of reinvigorate, these new partnerships with Amazon are very interesting. But that's not to say, I mean, we certainly do most public brands and manufacturers out there, every time they report, they talk about their DTC. It's still very important. So it's really just about that balance. And again, finding where they need to land on that. But I think it's all areas, we're starting to see even more specialty retail come into the conversation again, like independent kind of specialty, because it's more local, more high touch, the customer service. So, it's really like it's that whole kind of like 360-degree view on consumer touch points. And, that's going to be different for different types of categories and different types of brands.
I have another question.
Is it?
Outside
I don't think.
Yeah, no, please, go ahead.
Anybody
I
else?
have a question, just branching off of the memberships and everything like that. I might have missed this, sorry, I came in a little later. Have you seen any growth in, besides with luxury resellers, but rentals, for example, like Rent the Runway, Newly, those kind of things, is that something that you're seeing or have data on?
Just anecdotally, yes. I mean, those are not areas where we're getting sales from in our retail data. But I think there's still a small piece of the pie, but all of these, contribute to the shift in how consumers are shopping. And a younger consumer is definitely more, willing to try some of these alternative formats.
I'm gonna just give a shout out to Cindy in the LA meeting side. If you have questions, shoot them over to me and I'll make sure we ask them. Anybody else? Abby, we're gonna come back to you. Abby, back to you.
Oh, back to me now. Okay. Do we have any data on return rates? I'm very curious about, because spend is lower, are people just being more conscious overall and they're keeping more items, or, I'm just curious if the sentiment on that, because that's always like a big thing.
We don't have specific data on return rates, but we definitely see retailers are working harder, brands and retailers, right, with technology to kind of minimize those return rates. We've seen some policies tighten. I've had a number of just anecdotal stories of people I know have said, "Oh my God, I missed the return window. I've almost done it myself now," because you're expecting them to be super generous, and they aren't all anymore. So clearly, it's a challenge, but I think that retailers are trying to rein that in. So we might start to see them decline a little bit. I know that like in footwear, we always kind of had a stat that there was like, 30-40%. And our data would incorporate that because our retail sales data would be net in including returns. So, but it's hard to break it out.
I don't know if anything new came into the chat. Take a peek. And not.
No, I don't see.
I think we've got the.
Oh, here we go. Cindy, I see some from Cindy.
Okay.
With Thanksgiving being so late, how will that affect holiday sales? I think the calendar is the same as last year, which was different than the prior year. So the calendar won't be too different, but it condenses that time in the middle. There's a shorter lull in the middle, and it makes that weekend, and it actually ends up leading to, I think, a bigger last minute push. That last weekend of the Super Saturday, depending on, this will be because of the holidays on a Thursday this year, I think. And So we'll now see that weekend before being even bigger. So, you know, my general stance is that that we, no matter how the calendar works out or what consumer, you know, what retailers try to do in terms of the calendar and starting earlier, the last minute is always the most important because that's consumers get their deadlines.
Well, so we'll have an in-depth, really by category report in the September issue. We're going to be working with Beth and the Circana team to do a wrap up. So that'll be amazing information. Beth, I know you're always available for quick questions. So you've got your LinkedIn up there. If you missed it, we can share it. And don't forget to enter the Design Excellence Awards. It's the you know, it's open to apply for, and hopefully we'll see you at one of our events in Los Angeles or in New York very soon. So follow the newsletter for opportunities. All right. Thank you, Bev.
All right. Thank you,
Everybody for
everybody
joining.
on both coasts, online, in the office. Thank you.